It is morning here, so good morning, but I know it's good afternoon, good evening in other places. My name is Virginia Spielman. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the Executive Director of STAR Institute for Sensory Processing, and I'm a British-trained occupational therapist. I've lived around the world, haven't been to the UK for a really long time, so my accent ultimately is firmly parked in confusion. I'm also a mother and neurodivergent myself. And so today we're going to be talking about Ayres sensory integration therapy and how we can do that in a manner that is neurodiversity affirming. I would start by saying it is equally easy and difficult, and you'll see why. Now I'm just going to get you all so you can see the handout. Okay, share screen. Excellent. Excellent. I have got subtitles on for those of you that like that. Hopefully that will be helpful. And I can see chat. So if you do have questions as we go, pop them in there, but also save them for the end. I may ask you again. Okay, so welcome. Thank you so much for coming. We're offering these webinars for free. STAR Institute is a non-profit. We're a 501c3, and we can only do this sort of thing with the help of our community. So if you'd like to essentially, buy us a coffee, donate the same amount you'd spend on a coffee, or even think about maybe lunch, we'd love it if you could click on this QR code, and just every small amount makes such a huge difference to the work that we can do and the reach that we have. STAR Institute is a treatment center. We offer therapeutic supports. We research as we go, and our research department has prolifically published, as you may have seen. Our founder, Dr. Lucy Jane Miller, and our current Director of Research, Dr. Sarah Schoen, are doing great work. And again, that's really down to our community supporting what we do. And we educate others, which is what this is today. And so all of those three pieces work together. So let's talk about neurodiversity affirming sensory integration therapy, or we could talk, we could think of it as learning to be an ally in healthcare. And then specifically sensory informed healthcare is where we're at today. And so the position that I'm coming from is a learner. I have all sorts of streams of information helping me put this together. I am an avid student of the influence and importance of sensory integration and processing on human development, of how to be an ally, how to be neurodiversity affirming, how to support the well-being and flourishing of our clients, and so on. And so we're all learning together. I am ever so sorry about this. My voice has been completely fine until about 12 minutes ago. Okay. Possibly just not enough coffee this morning. That might be it. All right, so what we're going to talk about, I'm going to just quickly set us up. So for some of you, these definitions will be very, very familiar. And for others, they may be mind-bogglingly new. So use that chat box, ask those questions. And then I'm just going to talk quickly about the goals, not the goals of this presentation, but the goals of sensory integration therapy as conceptualized by Dr. Ayres, and the goals of neurodiversity affirming sensory integration therapy. As with anything, I think even the most beautifully designed neurodiversity affirming approach, it does come down to the individual therapist as to how it's implemented and whether or not it is truly neurodiversity affirming and has sort of fidelity to these principles. So, you know, we can talk about the theory, the approach, the frame of reference, but we're also talking about how we ourselves use this and apply this. The PowerPoint did not upload to chat, so we're just working on a new link for you all. We'll get that as soon as possible. We're then going to talk about specific considerations, and that's where we're going to try and sort of get to some takeaways, if you like, and really think about, well, what does this mean for me in the clinic tomorrow, or in the school, or as a parent looking for a neurodiversity affirming therapist? Can you drop into the chat what you represent from a professional or personal point of view? Are you a caregiver, a parent? Are you a neurodivergent individual? Are you an OT, a physio, a physical therapist, speech therapist, and so on? Oh, hi, some lovely names that I recognize there. All right, so we've got some mental health providers, quite a lot of physical therapists, lots of OTs as expected. Great to see social workers and speech therapists, rehab managers, fantastic. A lot of you are specifying pediatrics. Some of you are neurodivergent and you're clinicians. Welcome, my people. Okay, a parent teacher, great to see you all. Okay. So we're going to talk about therapist requirements and takeaways, but obviously you can apply those to your own personal situation. And then I'm going to provide you with some resources. And I will try and do questions as we go, but if you drop them in the chat and also save them somewhere else so that you can give them back to me later if I get lost, that would be really helpful. Okay, so quickly, what is sensory integration and processing? All right, I want to just be really clear that sensory integration and processing is a thing that everyone does all the time. And it is the way that we use what we sense to make sense of ourselves and the world around us. It involves all the sensations that are internal and my interoceptive experiences and all the sensations that are more externally driven. And there is even overlap in some of our sensory systems. Some people talk about 7 sensory systems, some people talk about 8, other disciplines talk about different numbers. There's definitely more than 5. And they're all open systems that work together, overlap, and essentially give you multiple streams of data about every event that's happening. It's very, very hard to find an event that's purely housed in one sensory system. These sensations occur, and then at that body level, throughout the body, they're filtered, organized, prioritized, and discrimination happens. Qualia, the qualities are distinguished. And that happens a lot in the thalamus as well. And as that information heads up into the processing areas of the brain through those electrical and chemical signaling in our brain and body, we are able to hold our body up against gravity, organize our eyes to work together, to converge, to track. Our respiration is supported by these processes, and the coordination of the 2 sides of our bodies is coming together, and we become this physical body, you know, and as that infant uncurling from life inside the womb and learning to move against gravity and all the way through life, these processes are occurring. And then, you know, also part of what we call sensory integration and processing is the ability to respond or react to these events in more specific ways that we might call the adaptive response, or not react, because maybe an event is happening that does, you know, can be ignored, right? And so there's a sound in the background and there's the voice of the lecturer, and my brain, I hope, is going to help support me to filter out the background sound, harder for some of us than others, and focus on orient to the salient, the key, the main sensory stimuli in the environment. And so these, just a very simplified version of what sensory integration and processing is. But already you can see, I hope, that whatever it is, it's very, very complex. It's not binary, and it involves lots and lots of systems and subsystems working together to help create this conscious perception of the world. And at Star Institute, we talk a lot about sensory health. And what do we mean by sensory health? We mean when we talk about sensory health, we're talking about more than the absence of a disease or a disorder. Some people use health as, in that sense, as the absence of illness. But we're really talking about this highest attainable state of neurosensory function, of sensory integration and processing that supports our ability to be who we want to be in the world, to participate on our own terms, to function in the ways that are important to us, to engage in meaningful occupations. Okay, so that's what we mean by sensory health. And we really think of it as a holistic addition to models of health and wellness and psychological well-being, where, you know, full health and living your life to you know, your utmost potential, if you like, achieving your utmost potential and flourishing is more than just physical health. We know, even though it didn't used to be accepted, it's more than just mental health as well. It's both of those things combined. And in a way, sensory health is that bridge between the two. And so just sort of setting us up so that we can have this conversation from this point of view. And sensory integration therapy that we're talking about today is, again, it's Ayres sensory integration therapy. So it's from the work of Dr. Ayres. And if you go back and watch that first webinar, which I hope to be able to give you the link to do so very shortly, then you will be able to see the fidelity measure of Ayres sensory integration therapy, and the difference between sensory integration therapy that we're talking about here, which is always child-led and play-based. It is dynamic and it is not protocolized. And the difference between that and sensory informed approaches, which are often somewhat, you know, may have a protocol, may have an exercise regime, might use play as more of a tool than a foundation, and so on. So when we're talking about sensory integration therapy, we're really talking about whole body play where that's appropriate and possible, that's safe, and is play for play's sake, wherein the therapist is coming alongside the child and able to scaffold that play to create therapeutic opportunities and invitations to engage in activities that will help that child develop greater mastery and self-organization. Okay, so some other terms. Just for clarity, neurodiversity is the belief that all brains are different and divergent ways of processing and experiencing the world are natural and to be celebrated. So everyone is neurodiverse. And then neurodivergent or neurodivergence is when you have a different way of processing or experiencing life. And common populations that are included as neurodivergent are autistic, ADHD, those people with various types of anxiety or mixed anxiety and depression, fetal alcohol syndrome, many survivors of trauma as well, the differences in learning styles, Tourette's, obsessive compulsive, and those different things. Other phrases that people use are neurominority or neuroprivileged for this population, and conversely, neuromajority are those people who might be non-autistic or allistic or neurotypical or neuroprivileged, some people talk about. And so we're all neurodiverse. Those of us with different ways of processing and experiencing the world are neurodivergent. You do not have neurodivergence, though. It is not something that you have in the same way. Perhaps you have a cold or you have a cough. So just thinking about your language, I've many times come across people who are working very hard to be allies, and they'll say, I'm working with a child who has neurodivergence. And again, like what's happening with your language there is just you're halfway towards that kind of neurodiversity affirming language, but halfway still isn't there. You're still talking about it as if it's sort of a pathology or a deficit. So a person is neurodivergent or they aren't, and so on. It's not something that you have. Okay, and then we talk about neuro-normative, and that word really refers to practices that are intended to normalize human behaviors. And so I'm not really going to use that phrase, I don't think, today, but just helpful to understand some of these terms and where we're coming from. So neurodivergent, generally outside the bell curve. Let's see if I can be clever with this slide. So you're sort of operating here in this space and here in this space. And then, of course, you've got your sort of very much outside the bell curve in that sort of 99th or 1st percentile here. And then the neuromajority can be anything from this, you know, where in normal distribution, most people fall, or even this sort of this broader bell curve. And it really depends what you're talking about. These aren't concrete terms, but this is just a way of helping conceptualize what we're talking about. Okay, so when we're talking about neurodiversity affirming, we are talking about this belief and acceptance that divergence is good for us, really, that there are divergent brains and bodies, and that celebrating that and making space for that benefits everybody. So there are divergent ways of communicating, and we do not privilege one way over another. We don't privilege spoken communication over typed spelling or AAC use, for example. And it's the same with different processing speeds and types of working memory and visual processing and so on. And it's the same with developmental trajectories, where we used to talk about spiky or uneven profiles or atypical profiles. And sometimes, you know, more recently talking about asynchronous development, and that same idea of uneven development or spiky or whatever, asynchronous, really actually just recognizing and moving towards trying to recognize just different developmental trajectories is going to really help us in this work, especially with our neurodivergent clients who, you know, so many of whom we don't need to worry about the pre-academic skills of letter recognition and so on, because all of that is already coming along. And in fact, it might be a very, very a strong area of special interest. But the opportunities for learning body mastery aren't really offered in our education environments for children. We're very sort of focused on, in mainstream, on these pre-academic skills. When we can just embrace different developmental trajectories, my wondering is, you know, will there be places for children who need that body-based work for longer? And, you know, will we be able to differentiate our children's needs rather than calling it therapy? Just a wondering that I have on a regular basis. Okay, so when we're neurodiversity affirming, we are always honoring individuality, respecting community pride. So think about deaf culture and how that has really emerged into something very specific and beautiful, and there's a lot of communality there. And this newer area of autistic pride, that, for example, autism is not defined by the deficits experienced by autistic people, but actually can be something where there's community, connection, and validation in connecting with one another. And so we can develop autistic pride. And so the therapy that we're offering is about facilitating growth of the individual rather than changing them on an external agenda, shaping them, that neuro-normative piece, right? We are hoping that the slides are coming because they would not upload to this chat, but I am not seeing any progress with that. I will keep you posted. Let's see. Okay. So this is what neurodiversity affirming means. If you are already seeing something a bit different, or, you know, wow, you know, something new, I'd love you to just be dropping those sound bites into the chat so that we can all like be on this journey together. I am trying to sneakily upload this PowerPoint to Google Drive for you all, and I will give you that link in a second. Okay, let's see. Share. Copy. Okay, see. Let's try again. Copy. Okay, hopefully you all can get the presentation now. Let me know. Okay. Okay, so, you know, what are we working towards when we are neurodiversity affirming in our approach? And we're doing sensory integration work. Okay. One of the familiar phrases for you, if you are a sensory integration certified therapist, if you're trained in Ayres sensory integration, should be the self-organized child. That ultimately, what we want is a child who can generate that adaptive response to the world. And I don't get to define what that means. It means that that child is able to organize themselves in response to sensations from inside and externally, and produce an action where they have agency. They have a sense of control over their actions. They can ask their body to do something. They can see something they want to do and create a plan and execute that plan. They have the power of cause and effect over their world, their body, their environment, which means they experience autonomy. They experience their own power in the world, and that's a huge theme of childhood. They experience mastery. And so what we want is for this sense of emerging sophistication with these areas. So it starts with that very simple body-based cause and effect, but it starts in the body and emerges to these abstract and more reflective places as we age. And it is in lots of different contexts. And that's the reason I've included this circle of communication diagram, because think about agency, autonomy, mastery, think about self-direction, self-determination. Self-determination theory is a great go-to when you're thinking about the goals of neurodiversity affirming care, and look at these different layers. So I want to be able to have agency, autonomy, and mastery with my intimate life partners. That might be, now, and historically we might call that caregivers in a presentation like this, right? But life partners is where we want to move with that language. Parents are life partners and caregivers, I understand, but there's always a reciprocity here. And we're trying to move away from the narrative that our neighbors, our children, and so on, who have differences in their brains and their bodies are helpless. And if we presume competence, then we're going to recognize that there's always reciprocity in these relationships, and talk much more about partnerships than caregiving relationships. But that intimate middle circle, I want every individual to experience agency, autonomy, and mastery there. I want them to experience it then in that next layer of with their good friends, what people might call family, right? The people you choose to be around you, those intimate friends and social circles. And then you've got your acquaintances, that more peripheral, perhaps people at work and so on. Then you've got paid partners. So that might be someone who's paid to provide some supports, to be a personal assistant, to be a communication partner, to be a respite caregiver, whatever, but, and then we've got these unfamiliar partners. Another way of thinking about this, of course, would be something like Bronfenbrenner, where you've got that bioecological, those contexts. And so you can think about the family environment all the way through to sort of at that national level of community and the systems that we operate in. Okay. And so our goal is the development of this person on their own terms, supporting the development of an individual on their own terms. And so that means a child who engages in activities because they get it. And that means we stop moving away from non-preferred activities as a goal. I might say this again, but it's not on any of the slides. So let me just say, if you want to be an ally, drop non-preferred activities from your goal setting. What you want is to help the child engage in that activity and find that motivation for engaging in it. So it might not be their favorite activity, but I'm going to do it because I'm part of this classroom community. I'm going to do it because we all respect each other in this space, and because my teacher's asking me to, and because it's group work and I want to help my friends. And we start finding ways to support understanding and motivation rather than imposing non-preferred activities on people. We're building understanding, and the child is engaging in these previously non-preferred activities. They're engaging in them on their own terms because they want to. So the goal becomes helping the child want to do harder things, want to do less fun things, and also, perhaps, and commonly, helping the teacher realize that not every activity should be mandated, perhaps, for some of our learners. Okay, what we've got here, this is, those of you who are familiar with Maslow, his hierarchy of needs, which stemmed from time he spent with the Blackfoot Nation. but it's really very, very old. And my feeling is that it's time to move on from that sort of quite static hierarchy of needs, which culminates in self-actualization. It's a very individualistic hierarchy of needs. It's also very static. If you look at some of these newer models, which are called neo-Piaget, neo-Maslowian, Maslow frames of reference, and then I've also incorporated indigenous frames of reference into this sort of new model, if you like, or new priorities. You can see that the me and the we is very much together, woven together in the development of personhood, that there isn't, that the apex is not self, the apex is much more us. And so we have identity and we-dentity, and we have this communality. And so when these are our priorities and our goals, again, it becomes much more about this individual's actualization of identity and we-dentity, and that really changes our goal setting processes. What we're doing is we're helping someone connect with other people because they get it, because they want to, because they can find joy, and helping the other people connect with that person on their terms as well. We're not changing fundamentally who a person is, but we're rather helping them get plugged in and feel autonomy and mastery and agency all the way through that process, all the way through this development of personhood. Okay. If you come to Symposium, which of course I would really love to see you there, I'm going to be talking just about trauma. But I wanted to, obviously this is a huge rabbit hole that we can go down. And so I just wanted to sort of recognize that when we're working in a neurodiversity affirming manner, we are having to think about traditional trauma. Oh, that's yellow. We don't want yellow. What some people call trauma with a capital T. And so this might be physical. Oh, that's very ugly. I'm not going to bother with that. Physical trauma, loss, war. Let's see. Oh, yeah, no, that's really ugly. But traditional ways of understanding acute traumatic incidences. There's also chronic trauma, which is becoming increasingly understood. And I would say the last 3 years of the pandemic is a form of chronic trauma that everyone has experienced together. And some people obviously have been impacted by it to a much greater degree. And then there's also trauma that comes from thwarted development, thwarted belonging, occupational injustice, and so on. And this is where I'm going to be going at Symposium. And so just thinking about how can we stop trauma cycles and ensure that, so really important to ensure we don't perpetuate them and become healing focused in our work. Because when we're supporting neurodivergent individuals, more often than not, we're also supporting traumatized individuals. And some of that trauma has been perpetuated in educational and healthcare systems, and we want to break that cycle. Okay, so then another thing we need to be familiar with in this work, and a lens that really I would encourage you to do some self-study on, which is all of this really, but here's another one, the social model of disability, okay? Which those of you from the UK will be much more familiar with, but just allow me to just quickly summarize that essentially the social model of disability proposes that the majority and sometimes the entirety of a person's experience of disability is imposed by the world, by policies, by the way environments are built, by the way our classrooms are designed and the curriculums that they use, by the language that we use, by marketing, you know, commercials, movies, so many things. The social model of disability really talks about impairment versus disabilities, and you'll see I use a few different phrases, and I'm really trying to work on figuring out where I'm going to land in my language as I navigate that difficult space between where is it and that disability lands for some people, or disability experiences or impairments or whatever. But essentially, the social model of disability rejects the idea that the disability lies in the person, and therefore moves away from pathologizing and, you know, that sort of very charitable, inspirational narrative around disability experience. You're such an inspiration to me. We don't want that anymore. We don't want that infantilization, you know. I broke a few toes some years ago and got pushed around in a wheelchair at the airport, and immediately people were talking to my husband who was pushing me and not me, right? That sort of infantilization of the disabled person, or the person we perceive as disabled. So the problem is the disabling world in the social model of disability. And that's very different to the medical model, which we'll talk about in just a second, and requires, all of this requires us to interrogate ourselves and the world around us for this thing called ableism. Some people call ableism disability oppression or the normalization agenda. They're slightly different in some ways. But ableism is the mostly unspoken, but often alluded to idea that there is one right way to be a human in a space in the world, right? You know, and of course the cosmetic industry really contributes to this, but so does the sports and health industry. So do many of the ways our research literature summarize their findings. And of course, the mainstream media take that even further. We have found the one right way to exercise. You know, bodies should look like this. The body mass index, in fact, is quite ableist because it's very narrow in the way it was found. And you know, there's so many things it doesn't allow for. So even our concepts of health and wellness tend to be quite ableist, that there is this one perfect right way to be a human. And so we have a lot of internalized ableism. And once you start paying attention to it, you may well notice it as well in your practice and the language that you use in your practice. When you have that conversation with someone who's wondering if their child is autistic, is on the autism spectrum, do you think you're telling them bad news? Do you hesitate? Do you have a narrative of, you know, bereavement for those parents? You're going to have to look at those different assumptions that you're bringing into the room and try and identify where ableism has become woven into your way of thinking and deeply embedded. And then slowly we all work together to try and extricate it. We also apply it to ourselves and our thinking about ourselves, which again is something we really want to be able to work on if we want to be able to protect our clients from it rather than perpetuate this narrative. And so we're going to have to address that, and we're going to have to just be constantly consciously aware of the medical model, which is everywhere. And the medical model isn't I wouldn't necessarily eradicate the medical model. Side note, I would absolutely like to decolonize the medical model, but that's a different lecture. The medical model is really designed for acute disease or injury, which means episodic. It means short-lived and serious. Already when you start to get into more chronic illnesses, the medical model becomes problematic. The medical model is really perfect for a broken arm, for a fever that's coming and going, and so it's not. We're not just casting it aside. We're saying it is important and it has its place. It does not have a place in discourse around neurodivergence and neurodivergent lived experience, unless of course that person has an ear infection or has sprained their ankle or something like that. And then it's part of the conversation. But at the moment, what happens is it dominates the conversation. And part of that is because it very well suits capitalist and industrialized models of health and education provision to provide care in this way. So it's a very narrow lens. It's not very person-centered. And when it's the only lens that we use, it's generally problematic. Because what happens then is you're talking about aberrant development. You're talking about, there's another word, deviant ways of being. And really that's sort of the opposite of this idea of diversity affirming or embracing divergence as something that we all benefit from. So in the medical model, the problem is the person, and the ultimate aim is curing or fixing the person so they can become normal again. Appropriate for broken arms, not appropriate for brains that process things differently because they're not broken. So one of the things that we really want one of the reasons we bring those up, and one of the things that we really want to recognize is that when these things are very, very internalized, they're a bit like a prescription lens and they color the way we see everything. Also though, when we have spent a lifetime perhaps trying to attain society's standard of what it means to be, this right way to be a person and so on, we may well think we're doing everyone a favor by helping them in that journey too. So we're not seeing things as they are anymore. And that's when we need to start really interrogating and questioning a lot of our assumptions and beliefs and some of those things that happen even in the non-verbal parts of our body in response to things, and looking at the root. And so that's a lot of reflection and reflective practice work that we need to do, okay, on these different things. Okay, and you know one of the things I just want to pause and recognize is the pervasive nature of the medical model, of ableism, of behaviorism as well, of course. And this is what this quote's about from Alfie Kohn. There is a time to admire the grace and persuasive power of an influential idea, and there is a time to fear its hold over us. The time to worry is when the idea is so widely shared that we no longer even notice it, when it is so deeply rooted that it feels to us like plain common sense. At the point when objections are not answered anymore because they are no longer even raised, we are not in control. We do not have the idea, it has us. So if we're going to be neurodiversity affirming in our practice, we need to pause and take stock and start noticing and start questioning so that we can be sure that we are practicing what we want to be practicing, rather than what we see in a lot of reflective practice is that people say they believe one thing, and then when they start paying attention to the work they do, realize they are enacting and perpetuating something entirely different. Okay, so we're moving away from, it's a shame that that has reformatted, but never mind. we're moving away from this sort of binary way of thinking about function to dysfunction, this continuum, that it's black or white, and there's hardly a gray area. You're either high functioning or you're low functioning. You've got Asperger's, woohoo, or nonverbal autism, and these are false binaries. They are incorrect, and you'll hear why. That we've got, and previously, again, another thing that's changed. Previously, we were talking about the core deficits in a lot of neurodivergent lived experience. So we would neurodivergent diagnoses would, we'd characterize the core deficits, right? Like the DSM. The DSM, the diagnostic manual, really, if you look at autism in there and the criteria for diagnosing autism, the core deficits, they really are the traits you would see in an unhappy, distressed autistic person. So we've got these descriptions of autistic distress that are used to diagnose autism. And it's very hard, therefore, to diagnose a happy autistic, and also some of these different presentations of autism that we're learning more and more about. For example, high empathy autism, high sensitivity autism, and so on. We've got this binary way of thinking formally, where we tend to put all autistics in one box, and it's a box of mystery that we don't really understand and we're not sure we really want to, even though autism itself is incredibly heterogeneous. And if you've met one autistic person, remember, one autistic person, and there's such a variation in that community as well as in the other neurodivergent populations. So we're moving away from this binary way of thinking as well when we do this neurodiversity affirming work and we work towards becoming an ally. And then we've got this tension, which I'm still figuring out in my own head, of where disability ends and begins, and what is the social model piece here, and where is the piece where this person just needs to be validated that their experience is a disability experience, very, very hard, and that they need help and accommodations and services for challenges that are body-based. So think about physical disabilities, it sort of becomes a bit easier. But there's still that place of tension where if my physical disability is simply that I mobilize on wheels instead of walking, am I really disabled if my community has fully utilized universal design and I can get everywhere and do everything because of the way my world is designed, right? And so there's this space of tension that we have to figure out. And we're not saying everything is positive, everything is awesome. That's not what we're saying. We're saying there's a place of tension, and right now the balance is, well, it's incredibly imbalanced, and all the blame is generally put on the individual. Where are we going to find the right spot with the individuals that we help? When it's the world's fault, if you like, my development is thwarted, my access and participation are thwarted, my belonging is thwarted because the world is inhospitable. When it's more body-based, I might be being given lots of accommodations, but I can't self-actualize because I can't make my arm do the thing. I can't produce the speech that's required. And so what can we do from the social model perspective to minimize that experience? And then where do we come in to provide therapeutic supports to optimize and maximize that person's sense of agency? And so that is going to be accommodations and therapy that hopes to provide opportunities for growth and like, you know, my personal little kit for dealing with the world. So building the world differently, personal accommodations, and the therapeutic supports that I need. And so, you know, when it's more the world that where, you know, we can identify that's more the issue. This is where that trauma piece comes in. The therapeutic supports are still necessary, but often they're about avoiding traumatization and re-traumatization, and addressing the fact that we live in an imperfect world at the moment, but then also let's change the world. Let's deconstruct ableism. Let's embrace universal design. When my impairment or disability experience is really contributed to by some body-based differences, then the therapeutic supports go there as well, but in this respectful and honoring manner that is neurodiversity affirming. And so we're going to provide those accommodations, and we're going to offer those therapeutic supports that start with safety and consent. You know, so there's this question when we're thinking this way, can we eradicate disability? And I don't know. I'm still working on this, but let's look at some different profiles. You know, you've got verbal apraxia, okay? So I cannot speak, I cannot use the spoken word. How do we eradicate disability in that situation? Well, perhaps a letterboard and a communication partner. Am I still disabled if I rely on them and they're part of my life? You know, question mark, I don't know. For some people, it's very, very important that they are recognized and validated in that experience of, yes, I can communicate with this AAC device, with this communication partner, but when they're not here, I can't. I still am experiencing this disabling aspect. And for other people, you know, they're not going to want that. And so a lot of this is personal. And so I've, you know, sort of thought about some different profiles here that might be traditionally thought of as disability profiles. But when we take this approach, we're wondering, can we eradicate that experience from this person's day-to-day? Okay. So as we're thinking about all of this, we also need to learn and think about the double empathy problem. And so you really need to look for Damien Milton's work. And I should have put his name on here, I apologize. Absolutely wonderful. And Frontiers have a lovely summary of this work that is very friendly and relatable, easy to read. I think it's on Frontiers Kids. But the idea behind the double empathy research that is really coming out at quite some speed at the moment is that autistic to non-autistic communication is problematic, not solely because the autistic person is lacking in social skills. In fact, what they're finding is that autistic to autistic social skills are quite nuanced and have a lot of strengths, and that there is a resonance there that feels quite good. But non-autistic to autistic communication lacks patience, sympathy, and theory of mind. The non-autistics lack autistic theory of mind. And so the labor is placed on the autistic person to learn neuro-majority or neuro-normative or socially acceptable social skills. And actually non-autistic communication partners in this research are quicker to judge, have less patience, can even be mocking isn't quite the right word. And so, but what we need then is this recognition that the labor should be equally divided. And actually that there's a lot of work that non-autistic people need to do to get better at this, because they're presenting as less skilled than their autistic communication partners in many ways. So I would just Google Damien Milton, but there are some resources later that we'll share with you. I have put here a podcast. We're not going to watch it together now because it's quite long, where you can learn about double empathy. So there's that YouTube link for you. And, you know, I hope that that also helps. All right, let's go through some common differences. What does this mean when we're supporting individuals? Okay, common differences. One difference that we're going to see in so many of our neurodivergent colleagues and clients and family members and so on is differences in state regulation. So when we talk about regulation and self-regulation, we're very much talking about it at that body-based level. We're not talking about self-control and executive function, which tends to happen up here. We're talking about here and in the body. So this ability to be calm and alert and available, to orient to what's important in the environment rather than, you know, being hyper-vigilant to everything that happens and so on. Generally, this is a process that toggles between conscious and unconscious effort. Certainly within that bell curve I showed you earlier, in those middle parts of normal distribution, we expect self-regulation, my ability to be calm and pay attention and filter other things out, to toggle between conscious and non-conscious effort, with a little probably lean towards non-conscious effort. A lot of these are non-conscious processes. For many, and I would propose, but I don't have research to back this up, neurodivergent populations, there isn't much non-conscious support happening here. That toggling leans much more towards the conscious side of things. There's a lot of conscious effort that goes into state regulation. And that is a bit like when we first got our phones and we had WhatsApp running on the, you know, that brand new messaging app, and we left it running in the background and it drained the battery. And then we had to all turn, you know, force close the apps on our iPhones for a while, or our smartphones. Now we don't even have to do that. Consciously, cognitively attending to my ability to be regulated in the world drains my battery, and it's always going on in the background, and it's using processing resources, it's using my battery, it's fatiguing, it's requiring a lot of what's called effortful control. And there are lots of things that contribute to our regulation or dysregulation, our state regulation. It is not just sensory, although that's a big, big piece of, like, whether I'm over-responsive or under-responsive, but it's also the other demands of the world: emotional, interoceptive, social, peer pressure, language, cognitive demands, and so on. And so this is something, when you're doing work that's neurodiversity affirming, you always, always, always have to come back to regulation. And if you lose regulation and regulation's becoming more effortful, there are going to be some sessions that you do that are going to be just about helping your client recover, and your agenda for movement and swinging perhaps, or, you know, dynamic adaptive response that you got last time, you have to just let go and go back to regulation. So there's self-regulation, and we learn self-regulation through this thing called co-regulation. This is our adaptation of Samarov's transactional model. What happens is, when you're an infant in infancy here, you are very, very reliant on your caregiver providing regulation, if you like. So all of this effort is from your life partners, your parents generally, or whoever's in your life caring for you, but you are still contributing already. As you age, you become increasingly able to self-regulate until you hit a certain age, and then certainly it's a downhill from there. But it's always still transactional. So there's always this, life partner, peer partner, regulation going on all the way through. When we're supporting neurodivergent populations, accessing co-regulation from others is often very, very challenging. So slowing yourself down and lots of parent coaching can be really helpful so that we can provide co-regulating supports that are accessible and actually increase felt safety rather than diminish it. So we have to be attuned to our clients and what their needs are to help them access co-regulation, and through that develop increasing ability to self-regulate. And that is a whole training course, a whole PhD program right there. Okay, but self-regulation is different in neurodivergent populations. State regulation has to be a priority of any therapeutic support that you're offering, and you have to go back there whenever you perceive that it's gone awry. And so demands can increase dysregulation, and movement can increase dysregulation. It's not always, as I said, sensory over-responsivity. And so one of the things, especially as sensory integration therapists, that we need to remember is lots and lots of contributors can cause my cup to overflow, my arousal to go too high, and I become dysregulated. Okay. Now we're going to talk about motor apraxia, and again, this is a whole PhD that you could do all on your own. It's a whole certificate course that we could find, but we're going to talk about it in 2 slides. Essentially, what we're realizing more and more and more is that while we knew from the very beginning, really, of Ayres' work that dyspraxia presented in different ways, I think there's been an oversimplification somewhat over time, and we're also adding more characteristics to the pot through the work of people like Elizabeth Torres. So dyspraxia, this challenge with forming the idea of a motor plan, organizing my body to execute the motor plan, executing it and changing it if I need to. So that piece of practice, at any point of that, I might have differences, or I might not yet have developed the skills to be able to produce that action. And we call that dyspraxia or developmental coordination disorder. But even within that bucket, where we might call something ideational dyspraxia, where it's the creation of the idea that's challenging, or we might call it somatosensory dyspraxia, where it's this more body-based feeling myself in the world, or it's all of the above, right? There's also this thing called motor apraxia, which is really where my needs are much, much greater, and my ability to even know when my body is in space is more impacted. And so in motor apraxia, we're seeing that we need a different treatment approach to some of the other presentations or profiles of developmental dyspraxia. And so there's this significantly greater motor difference. And one of the things that's come out of Torres's work is we're seeing in this population, which is awesome, also is what I'm trying to say, also very co-occurring with non-speaking or unreliably speaking experiences, is that I don't learn based on feedback. So I might do an action and get it wrong, and where with another child, if you slow me down and say, that didn't work, I wonder why it didn't work, let's make a different plan. With this motor apraxic child, there's no point saying that, because they've gotten such a lot of mixed data and extra erroneous data and static in with their messages, that when you go, I wonder why that didn't work, that, you know, that they're just like, well, that's the same old message I've always been getting, which is that I'm not doing things right. But they're not actually going to be able to correct their plan and produce a better plan. So we don't let them make the mistake and learn from it with this population. We help them do it right in the first place through motor coaching. And that motor coaching might be verbal instruction, 1 foot, 2 foot, excellent, okay, you know, that sort of thing. Or it might be visual targets. Here's where you're going, okay, arm, right? It might be touch. It might be a combination of the above. You've got to figure out what works for each client. This takes a lot of learning and a lot of unlearning. And there's a way of doing it that doesn't patronize and infantilize the child, where you're really helping them be successful at the thing they want to do as well. So I've noticed you really want to climb the layers of Lycra, but you're overwhelmed by that new exciting piece of equipment and you run away. So you've got novelty overwhelm, and I might, you know, and it will be different for different clients, but I'm seeing that you really liked the look of the Lycra. Let's go to the Lycra together. We can get your body to do it together, sort of thing, right? And it's going to be very different, as I said, for some clients, much, much less language. But for many clients, more language than we've previously used is actually very helpful. Okay, and then I'm going to hold the Lycra. Okay, this is where we're going. Let's march, march, march our feet to the Lycra. And then when that body impulsively wants to turn away, no, let's walk in, and we're going to climb, and I'm going to coach you through every step of climbing up that Lycra, and you're going to feel so successful, and we'll do it again, and we'll do it again, and I'm going to help you be successful every time. I am not going to expect you to learn from your mistakes, because that is not yet available for you. And this is some of the stuff that's come out of Elizabeth Torres's work. And because of this massive difference in motor output, inconsistency is much more normal for me than consistency. And so, you know, where, you know, often what happens is teachers will say things like, well, you did it yesterday. Oh, yeah, that's where I want to go. Well, you did it yesterday. You know, I know you can do it. I know she can do it. We're going, oh, we need a little bit more help today. Okay, no problem. Let's get it done together. Right? We're not putting behavioral labels and judgment and valence on body-based movements, because we know they're different. And this is a different way that this body moves. Then there's also this development of motor loops that can happen, and that's a lot to do with motor disinhibition. And motor disinhibition is essentially body-based movements that are have not been filtered through that upstairs brain. And so, you know, they're somewhat involuntary. They're closer to automatic movement than they are to purposeful planned movement, you know. And think about purposeful planned movement as that time you went to the aerobics class or the dance class, and how you had to concentrate to execute that new pattern, right? But motor disinhibition is really a much more, it's below the surface of awareness level. And so it feels intrusive, because, you know, what my brain wants and what my body wants is doing are not the same. But it gets labeled as misbehavior again and given intent, when in fact it's really more about this kind of, oh, there goes my body again, compulsion to move, but that's below awareness. And what can happen with that is that those things can become over practiced when we're not getting the help that we need. And one of the things that doesn't help is the same external sensory stimuli every time we do the action. Now, this is a problem when we've been taught as therapists and clinicians to be consistent in how we deal with bad behaviors. And so we always provide the same sensory stimuli to the misbehavior. So the elopement, for example, always gets the same prompts. And so, in fact, even if you're anticipating I'm about to do something bad and you say something, that could be a trigger, a sensory stimuli. You could be giving me the green light at that body level for this motor output to occur, where I get stuck in a loop and my body is doing things my brain actually doesn't really want it to do. And so then it becomes even more and more and more ingrained. And so what we need to do, and of course, if it's more negative and everyone gets upset when I do it, I'm going to really learn that I'm a bad person. But also that is even, think about that sensory stimuli. Think about the power it has when everyone gets heightened and more upset. It's that sensory experience becomes a multi-sensory, multi-affective experience. And then, we've got even more neurons firing together and we've got even more deeply embedded behaviors. So the supports that are designed to help are in fact hindering and perpetuating the problem. And so we need to come in and study this and do that PhD, do that research. We need more research in this area, but we need to build a whole new repertoire of motor fragments that this individual can put together to generate successful, purposeful movement. And so when they're younger, this can be done through play, and as they get older, people like Dana Johnston are doing fantastic work using quite sort of sports and gym-based routines to teach this and coach this. And then you've also got Elizabeth Vossler and people like that doing fantastic, fantastic work with this in how it relates to speech. So let's quickly talk about speech. We've got our children who classically were called nonverbal, where the assumption was that there was no language. And of course, we're realizing that they are actually incredibly communicative when given the right supports. So for some, it's AAC devices. For some, it's just helping them learn language in this Gestalt language, natural language acquisition approach, where the name you need to look for there is Marge Blanc, who's amazing. And also that there's other people who when they're overwhelmed, lose speech. So they're unreliable speakers. Sometimes they're able to use the spoken word and other times not so much. And so they need choices. But essentially, the implications for sensory integration therapists are we have to get trained in providing communication options to our clients. So many times I see children leaving their AAC devices in the waiting room to go and do their sensory integration work in the gym. And you are stripping that child of one avenue for agency and autonomy. And then what happens is I see people preparing visual schedules. So rather than organic play-based work, we start having a fixed routine that we do the same again, and again, which is problematic because you're going to create a motor loop instead of a repertoire of movement that this child can pull on, and because it's no longer child-led and true play. You're instead using play as a tool rather than playing for play's sake and scaffolding therapeutically as the SI therapist. So essentially the implications for all of these varieties of speech are that we are getting better at providing communication options. We might have the lamp pictures, for example, up on the wall. We might have the AAC device always with us, right? Even if we're wearing it, just so it's nearby. We might be learning how to become spelling to communicate partners or ensuring that someone's available all the time, using some of the earlier stages of spelling to communicate, getting trained in those, using laminates of the body and of colors and of numbers in our play, watching our children's nonverbal gestural communication, realizing when they run up to something that they want to do it, even though they run away, and helping coach them back to it. Motor disinhibition, there's a question, how is motor disinhibition different than tics? And actually they're very, very similar. I would suggest reading this book. It's called Autism, the Movement Sensing Perspective. It is by Elizabeth Torres and Caroline Wyatt. It's dense, but it's a great read, and it's really going to help you answer that question. Okay, we've also got these sort of characteristics that are talked about a lot: insistence on sameness, intolerance for uncertainty, resistance to change. They're inescapable aspects of human nature. Like, actually every human to some degree identifies with this at some stage in their life. When we are neurodivergent populations do not experience autonomy, agency, the respect of others, belonging, inclusion, or mastery, or predictability, because everything feels like a surprise and is being done to them rather than with them, etc., then it's a very natural process to double down on insisting things remain the same. And so rather than looking at this as an aberrant or deviant behavioral manifestation, we need to start respecting it, honoring this person's need for predictability, which is a very fundamental human need for every human. So honoring the need for predictability, honoring the need for autonomy, looking at what might cause anxiety. And so the key things here, and really as with everything else, is that we, let's see if I can do this, are always honoring consent. I'm sorry, I thought I could type onto these and I have not figured that out. So consent first. Does the person want to do this? And safety, equally safety. And when we talk about safety, what we mean is felt safety, not just what you think is safe. No, you're fine, it's fine, is not what we mean, okay? And again, that's not honoring consent. So these two things really overlap in a massive way. So felt safety, oh, okay, that doesn't feel safe. I'm hearing that you don't feel safe. Let's change this. Let's look at this. Let's fix it together, right? These are the non-negotiables that we start and end everything we do with, that we come back to every minute of every session when we're doing neurodiversity affirming therapy. And so that means accepting a child's no, which can be really hard for some therapists. But as soon as you've gotten into that area where they're not giving you consent and it's starting to feel like a power struggle, you've moved away from these central goals of actualizing this person's identity and we-dentity, from mastery, autonomy, and agency, from self-determination and self-direction. So consent and safety are your number one. Two-sided coin, but your number one thing that you're always going to go back to. And we're not going to pathologize insistence on sameness in the same way. We're going to go back to really looking at what's going on and mitigating anxiety and increasing trust and so on. Okay. This is a video that we should be able to watch. Maybe it's here.
Monotropism, setting up the science. The theory of monotropism describes the way in which autistic people's neurology processes sensory information, engages with something in order to give it our full focused attention, works to move our attention from one thing to another, and validates autistic experience in a non-pathological way. In order to give anything our full attention, we need to build up inertia, allowing our sensory systems time to align themselves with what we're focusing on. What's happening in that time is the monotropic brain is looking for an in, a hook, something to spark its interest. What does it look and feel like? Autistic people experience attention very differently to non-autistic people. Once it has found that hook, the autistic brain is able to lock onto it, but the focus of our attention has more mass than anything else in our environment. It's like a black hole. Its gravity drags us in. We're pulled towards it with immense force, hurtling through a tunnel of attention. We then experience a state of flow, where the object of our attention becomes all-encompassing. Inside that flow state, we can have incredibly intense experiences. It enables us to explore topics at great depths and complete tasks to a high degree of proficiency. It can feel incredibly good to access a flow state around your passions, increasing your levels of enjoyment and satisfaction, and thus increasing the intensity of the flow. If an autistic person is in an environment in which they feel unsafe, sensorially or emotionally, greater monotropic depth can be needed to cut out those negative sensations. Conversely, unsafe places and situations can dysregulate us too much, so that we're unable to build enough inertia to get into a flow state. Why is it important to know this? If you aren't aware of monotropic neurology, it can be easy to assume that while in a flow state, an autistic person is deliberately disengaged, deliberately not listening, or not paying attention on purpose. This is all classified negatively as challenging behavior, but is not the case. It can be easy to assume that an autistic person should transition between states of attention as quickly as non-autistic people do. But coming out of your attention tunnel and moving your attention from one thing to another can be difficult and take time. You're pulling the weight of your being out of a gravity well, and afterwards, you need to realign your sensorial and emotional state, and then refocus on the next thing that needs your attention. If an autistic person is pulled out of monotropic flow too quickly, it causes our sensory systems to dysregulate. This in turn triggers us into emotional dysregulation, and we quickly find ourselves in a state ranging from uncomfortable to grumpy to angry, or even triggered into a meltdown or a shutdown. This reaction is also often classed as challenging behavior, when really it is an expression of distress caused by the behavior of those around us. How you can get things wrong: not preparing for transitions, too many instructions, speaking too quickly, not allowing processing time, using demanding language, using rewards or punishments instead of intrinsic motivation, poor sensory environments, poor communication environments, making assumptions, and a lack of insightful and informed staff reflection.
So that is a video I suggest you go back to and watch again, because that was a lot of information in there. I'm not going to go over it because of time. But I think you can see, and I hope if you have in your head 1, 2, or 3 things that means for you in the clinic or the classroom tomorrow or wherever you are, write them down. Okay, don't rush transitions. Help make any change predictable. And that means if you use a visual schedule, starting to introduce an oops card, you need to look that up, because again, I'm not going to talk about that to a great to great detail, but equipping our young people to know how to deal with surprises. And also respecting that unsafe environments are not environments in which it's very easy to get into that state of flow and learning. So the autistic brain and the ADHD brain are particularly prone to monotropism, and it can be a real strength. And it, absolutely has massive benefits. Some people might say it helps them through their PhD programs. Okay, but let's quickly move on to stimming. So stimming is a really important aspect to pay attention to as well. And essentially, the nutshell summary is not all stimming is bad. Actually, most stimming is self-regulatory and it's good. But we also can't put it all into the same bucket. So Sorry that this is so tiny. Let me take you through it. So if we're thinking about caregivers and helpers and how we want them to understand stimming, this is not complete yet, but this is where we think we're going. All right, so first of all, is it my business to deal with this stim, or am I just dealing with it because it's a stim and I've been told that that's the type of behavior I need to extinguish? If I'm just dealing with it because stims are bad, then I need to step away, right? None of my business. And that, yeah, thanks, Erin. That link is also on the slide, the handout that hopefully people have managed to download for that video on monotropism. Okay, so is it my business? Yes, for whatever reason, it's my business. Okay, I'm gonna pause and I'm gonna slow down and I'm gonna like be a detective. I'm gonna wait, I'm gonna watch, I'm gonna wonder, okay. So I have a list of questions then that I can ask, all right? Is this person in pain? Is this a stim where they're hurting themselves? And are they therefore maybe telling me that they're actually in pain? Do they have an ear infection, a gut issue? Is it something with their teeth? Have they been checked for lice or a urinary tract infection? Headache, dehydrated? This one, key area, if this is your question, see a physician. Not everything is sensory. And you cannot take a solely sensory approach to self-harm behaviors. You have to be a broader detective than that. Is this dopamine seeking as an adaptive response? This might be about stress regulation or arousal regulation or a response to fatigue. And I need to look at patterns over a long period of time and find other ways to provide that input if I really need to provide an alternative, which you don't always. Could this be more of a obsessive compulsive piece, a ritual, a trauma? Is it psychological in nature? And have I got an appropriately trained mental health professional helping me with this detective work? It could also be a faulty reward cycle, the same as what we think some sensory seeking behaviors might be, that sort of addiction cycle. And then again, that would be a different approach. This is an incomplete flow chart, but it's where we're heading in our sort of clinical reasoning around stimming. If it's sensory motor in nature, is it a tic, a loop? Is it motor inhibition? Or is it related to sensory modulation? Look, that's only one piece of this whole problem-solving picture, where it could be under-responsivity, over-responsivity, or differences in discrimination, where I just need more data. And then another piece might be, is this about experiencing mastery? This is something I can do. And when I go back to doing it, it helps me feel that sense of agency that I don't feel in many other places. And probably it's a combination. And certainly there are pieces missing from that flowchart that should be on there. But like I said, it's a work in progress. In fact, please write that on that slide, work in progress. Okay. So what do we need to remember in our practice? If our client has motor apraxia, what their body is telling us might contradict what they really want to tell us, what their brain wants. And this big piece that I sort of alluded to, we need to talk about a bit more, which is when somebody moves in a particular way, talks or doesn't talk, uses AAC devices, there tends to be an assumption that they are developmentally delayed, but we really have to rethink that whole concept of developmental delay when there is a massive motor piece. And in fact, generally, but particularly when there's a massive motor piece. Assessments of cognition generally rely on motor control and motor outcomes, and for that brain-body connection, that my body is doing something my brain wants it to. What if it isn't? And how is it that we're deciding this person is developmentally delayed and we're giving them the same inputs at 4 as we are at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and even beyond? Presuming competence really means rethinking this whole concept of developmental delay and being much closer to chronological age, but accommodating for motor differences, accommodating for individual differences. And so you're going to have in your waiting room fiction books for older children in your therapeutic bookshelf as well, right? You're going to have the National Geographic for kids, as well as, you know, Paw Patrol and Peppa Pig, for example, all right? We really have to rethink standardized testing, and even our tests of sensory differences have tended to be formed using normative populations, using populations that don't meet criteria for neurodivergence, right? They're inside that massive part of the bell curve. We're going to have to start, as overdue, developing evaluation tools that are used, designed for neurodivergent populations. But at the moment, it just changes our testing techniques. Okay, and we also need to make sure that the stories we're telling our young people are about building their sense of self and not destroying it. And so again, this is about like ascribing intent to behaviors that are non-intentional, right? So don't hit, that's unkind. Tells a child they're unkind, even though perhaps this was a motor disinhibition response to some stimuli. And so instead, you know, Virginia didn't mean to hit you. Her body just sometimes does those things. It's starting to help me see that I'm still learning how to control my body, and I'm not inherently a bad person. And you need to find the right language for the client that you're supporting, okay? And so there's one piece that we want to develop, which is a sort of no demand approach, where it comes back to collaboration. And for many of our young children, we're really trying to move away from demands. And a no demand approach is a great approach for our neurodivergent children who are close to or in burnout as well. And I am really seeing young children and of course middle school and high school age children in neurodivergent burnout, and that a lot of that is about the amount of demands they experience in every micro transaction all the time, every day. And so sometimes we need to really give them a no demand, some no demand time during the day should being built in, but also using that as a therapeutic approach. And again, unfortunately, that's like a whole different webinar, but it's something to think about. We also need to be, I said a lot of the labor's on ourselves. We need to be reliable. We need, you know, do what you say what you mean, be authentic, be respectful, presume competence, be closer to chronological age than developmental age, be collaborative, do this together. Stop worrying about independence, focus on interdependence, focus on working together, and take time to really see what, you know, and enjoy the things that give that child or client joy. Find that authentic place to really see the beauty of the reflection of the light on the spinning wheel on the wall, or, you know, as you look through, or etc. etc. Be humble and admit that we're all learning, and I'll learn with you, and sometimes I'll get it wrong. Oh, I got that wrong. I'm really sorry. That's not my intention. It's really important to me that you always get to decide what we're playing, and I really got that wrong. I'm sorry. And be reflective, really interrogate those assumptions and those body-based reactions that we have. And when we don't like someone or something, or we're starting to dread a session, like, get reflective with yourself and really have a look at what's going on, because this is personal. A reflective practitioner is thoughtful, questioning, and constantly striving to reach heightened levels of understanding about themselves, the children and families with whom they work, and the connecting relationships being experienced, as well as a practitioner who is able to consider issues of culture, context, perceptions, values, and beliefs, both their own and the families, and how these can impact behavior and interactions. Okay, I apologize for going a couple of minutes over. We started a couple of minutes late. Here are your resources. They're in the handouts, which I hope you've all managed to download now. You will be sent the recording. I'd love to see you at our symposium. I'd love to see you in person, but we'll also be online, and it would be great to continue learning together. There are more of these free webinars. There are more, there's also our neurodiversity firesides, which are much more of a conversation than me just speaking at you. But thank you so much for your support. And again, if you are interested in just buying us a cup of coffee to say thank you for these presentations, that would be most appreciated. Yeah, all right. I'm going to stop recording now and just say thank you. Recording will be sent out. Thank you. Okay, there is a talk on motor disinhibition. There's several on